Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of our program. With me today are our regular Viewmeisters panelists. On my right is Regina Nelson. Regina comes to us from the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies at Western Michigan University. On the far left, and he is on the far left on most issues, is Don Cooney. Don's a professor in the School of Social Work at Western and also a Kalamazoo City Commissioner and the Vice Mayor currently. And with us, we have a very special guest this time around, Mark Braverman. Mark is, I think your official title has to do with Kairos, Program Director for Kairos, is that correct?
Yeah, executive, I was Program Director, this is an old one.
Oh, okay.
Now it's just me. So I get to be Executive Director.
You get to be the Executive Director.
Kairos,
okay. And the topic is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, an issue that Mark has worked on for a very long time. And we scheduled your appearance on the program and your appearance here in Kalamazoo before the recent conflict erupted. So again, very timely for you to be here. And Mark will be talking at various venues in Kalamazoo throughout the day today. Let's provide a little bit of background on Mark. His roots are in the Holy Land. I think it was your grandfather, right?
My grandfather was born there and he emigrated as a young man to the United States.
Okay. So you grew up in the U.S. and you were reared in the Jewish tradition, as you state on your website. And then you were trained in clinical psychology and crisis management. And that's your PhD, right, in psychology?
Correct, yeah.
Your professional career has involved you working with people who were impacted by traumatic situations.
Right.
And in 2006, and you may want to talk a little bit about this, but you made a transformative trip to the Holy Land. Don and I have both been, I don't know if Regina has been, but Don and I have both been to Israel, Palestine, and I know that what we observed about the occupation had a big impact on us,
Yes.
and apparently this was a transformative trip for you.
It was.
And so since that time, you've been devoting most of your effort full-time pretty much to this conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mark is the author of 2 important books. I don't know if we can zoom in and look at these. I think the most recent is A Wall in Jerusalem, Hope, Healing, and the Struggle for Justice in Israel and Palestine. And his earlier book, which I think is now in a second edition, right? Fatal Embrace, Christians, Jews, and the Search for Peace in the Holy Land. The Hamas attack on October the 7th touched off a new round of bloodshed in the Holy Land. And I was wondering if you could give us someone who's worked on this issue for so long. Of course, there's a long history, and I know you want to help us understand the historical context of that, but just what has been your reaction to the recent bloodshed, and what kinds of things have you been doing since October 7th to try to help people understand and deal with this situation?
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Ron, and thanks for having me on the program. Of course, it's very timely. Before I launch in to respond to your question, I just want to say, should I look at the camera?
Oh,
should I look at you?
No,
look at us.
just look at us.
We're just sitting around a table
Right,
talking.
we're just talking. There's no camera.
Right.
There's no fourth wall. Okay. A lot of the things that I'm going to be saying today, here, and later on in the day, may appear shocking or mind-blowing or mind-opening, hopefully mind-opening to people. And I want to put that in a little bit of a context in terms of who I am and how I came to this.
Sure.
So as you say, I'm Jewish. Some people say, well, when did you convert from being Jewish? Because a Jew couldn't be saying the things you're saying. But I am Jewish. And in fact, I feel like I've become the best Jew I can be. I was born in 1948, the year of the declaration of the State of Israel. The Jews call it the day of our independence and freedom. The Palestinians call it the day of our catastrophe. And if you're a Jewish kid born in Philadelphia in a very strong Jewish community in 1948, 3 years after World War II, and this Declaration of the State of Israel, you were raised in a very potent combination of rabbinic Judaism, mainstream Judaism, fairly traditional, and political Zionism. I mean, the two are completely merged.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'll understand after I start talking that I think that's not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us generally agree that nationalism, and ethnic nationalism in particular, and religion is not a good mix. But that's exactly what happened. And it was in our liturgy. I mean, I prayed 3 times a day. A prayer that was written by the rabbinate of the new state of Israel, the rabbis of the new state of Israel, saying, may God bless and protect the state and the army of Israel. So we're not talking about Zion or Jerusalem or some religious thing. The state of Israel and its army and its leaders, the first flowering of our redemption. So I was taught that I had been born at a time, a blessed time, when our people had been redeemed from 2,000 years of suffering. That's a narrative that has, obviously, sadly, a lot of truth in it. But then when you mix it with what I later learned was a ethnic, nationalist, settler, colonial project, it does not go well. And what we saw happening on October 7th did not just come out of nowhere on October 7th.
Yeah. Long, long history.
So what I have to say about Israel today, and I have family there, deep, deep family roots. I have friends there, a big network there, and now in Palestine as well. But as a Jew, I say with a broken heart. It's not easy for me to say the things I'm about to say, but they have to be said. And I say this out of compassion, not only for the Palestinians who have been dispossessed and are now being subject to what we have to call it by its name, genocide, but for the Jewish citizens of Israel who are paying the price for this as well. And they are, let me tell you, they are freaked out right now. And the tragedy of it is that the Palestinians are an oppressed people, right? They know who they are. We are the people with our back, as Howard Thurman said, the African-American theologian. They're the people with their backs to the wall. They're the people that Jesus talked about, the naked man lying. They know who they are. And they have not forgotten who they are, and they have not lost their dignity, and they have not, although they're getting close, I've never seen this before, they have not lost their determination to resist and to remain a people. They're proud, wonderful, funny people. Those Jews behind that wall that we built, which is not just a physical wall, but a psychological wall, are growing up and are the prisoners of fear and racism, what they've been taught. And the history of being a Jew, and I know this because that's in my blood, is to be proud of your tradition, and I am. But also to be taught that the world is a dangerous place. It is not safe. All those people out there, we call them the Goyim, it means the Gentiles, the nations, are a drunken rabble that wants to kill us. It's like my grandmother's psyche is right injected into my veins. She grew up in Europe. You know, early 20th century. It's not a fun place to be a Jew.
The Holocaust looms so large over
Yeah, and the Holocaust was just the culmination of 2,000 years of slaughter and marginalization and denigration and humiliation, and it was horrible. And the Western Christian world has to answer for that. And I'll talk, hopefully we'll get into talking about that because it plays into the politics today. White guilt, white Christian Western guilt about Jewish suffering. And now there's this guilt offering. And Jews get a pass to do what they want because we've suffered so much. I mean, that's the short story here. Mm-hmm. So I say this with a broken heart and great compassion for the Jews of Israel who, you know, they're the third generation now, or fourth generation of people who came there because they were refugees themselves looking for safety, or they're idealistic and bought into this romantic notion of let's found our own country where we can be safe and proud for the first time. And ethnic nationalism was zeitgeist at the end of the 19th century when Zionism was born. Everybody wanted their own country, France for the French and Germany for the Germans. And, it was strong. But in the 21st century, to talk about a Jewish state, how do we feel about Christian nationalism in a Christian state, which we almost have now? And what does it mean for women, for example, and for immigrants? And ultimately, for anybody who doesn't fit into the white patriarchal, leadership, and they're scared. The white patriarchs are scared. It ain't good for me, and it ain't good for Regina, and it ain't good for the immigrants from all over, especially if you're brown. So we don't like that. And talk about a Sharia state, an Islamic state. Oh my God. So why do the Jews have to have a Jewish state? Because it's the same deal, folks. We're ending up in the same place. And we saw it on October 7th. And the world is finally seeing it on October 7th. But that is not the beginning of the story. So I heard a lecture, saw a lecture on video the other day by a man named Ilan Pappé. If anybody's interested, Ilan, I-L-A-N, Pappé, P-A-P-P-E, with a little accent on it. Eminent Jewish Israeli historian. He used to be at Haifa University. Then he wrote a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And guess what? He ain't in Haifa anymore. There's no room in the Israeli academic establishment for historians, good historians, who want to write the real history of the country. Okay, we're seeing it here now. What if you want to write about, what is it, the first ships that came, the 1892 project, the 1692 project?
1619.
Right, you want to write about the 1692 project, right? And you're canceled, right? You want to write about the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous population here, because the African enslaved people were brought in to farm the land that we stole from the first peoples, right? So you want to write about that. So Ilan was writing about the real history of Israel, which was an ethnic cleansing project. And I tell you folks, it was planned way before Hitler. When Ben Gurion and his gang got together in the 30s, they already had a plan for how we're going to take the land. And if you're a settler colonial project, you want to get the land, you got to get rid of the people who are on it. And they had it all figured out, and they mostly pulled it off in 1948, and they've been trying to finish the job since then. So anyway, so Ilan, he was a friend, and a brilliant historian, said, here's the deal. And he gave this talk a couple of days after October 7th. He said, if you want to, and people are saying, well, what's Hamas up to? What are they doing? Why is this happening? Right? He said, you got to understand the historical context. Here's the historical context. I'm going to give it to you in just a couple of words, and it tells the whole story. He said, those kids, those Hamas kids, who broke through that barrier and came over and committed those savage acts, are the third generation of people who were driven out of that area of southern Israel, which abuts Gaza, and put into what is now this open-air prison of the Gaza Strip. They still hold the keys to their houses in those villages that were cleansed. And on the site of those villages, those three kibbutzim in particular that were attacked, right, they are built on the ruins of those villages. So those kids were coming back to their ancestral villages and doing to them what they felt had been done to them. They grew up 3 generations living in a prison, yearning, almost at being able to see their homeland. And Gaza is not just a prison, okay? It's like the Warsaw Ghetto. And when people say, I have a granddaughter, she's wonderful, she's in college, she's studying international relations, she's been schooled well, I helped do that in terms of what the facts are. And she said, Grandpa, what is Hamas up to? What do they think they're doing? I mean, it's suicidal, isn't it? And I said, you know what I think, Becca? I think they know that at this point, they know that they're being annihilated, that that's what's happening. They're going to die. And they want to die standing. And maybe they'll take some of them with them before they go. Just like the Warsaw Ghetto fighters, a bunch of people with homemade Molotov cocktails who stood up to the Wehrmacht, right? This is how we're going to die. And in my heart, I think that's what's happening. That's the historical context of October 7th. And nobody talks about it. I mean, the media is covering Gaza now because it's a story, and they can show pictures of rubble and dead babies, right? But what's the answer? How much humanitarian aid can we get to these people? Nobody's talking about what's going on and why they're dying. That's where we need to start. And then we can ask questions about what can we do and why and all of this stuff.
Mark, when you present that history, which is a powerful, and that historical context has to be understood. When you present that, you're often charged, though, with supporting terrorism, right? As if this just erupted 2 weeks ago out of nowhere, and these vicious massacres took place, and many innocent civilians were killed by Hamas in that raid. And you're accused of supporting a terrorist group, totally out of the context of the history, though.
Right.
But how do you respond when people level that charge?
Well, I don't respond this way, but to you, Ron, and Regina, and Don, you know that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So nobody wants to, and you're canceled if you start to talk about Hamas and resistance in the same sentence. But of course it's resistance. Mm-hmm. And you may not agree with the form that resistance takes, but they have, people say they have the right to it. Of course they have the right to resist. But what causes a suicide bomber, some kid or woman, to strap explosives to their body and go up and blow up a cafeteria or a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a bus station? Nobody asks, who is that person? Why do they feel they have to do that? And because they have nothing else to lose. Everything's been taken away from them. Their future, their dignity, their hope, their community, their very identity. So, I mean, that's one thing that I say. Of course it's terror, and the Jews of Israel are terrorized. And maybe that was one thing that Hamas wanted them to experience. But one thing you can say is, we've had our own Jewish terrorists. There were Jewish terrorists who assassinated diplomats and blew up hotels back in the 20s and 30s and 40s to get the British out of Palestine so that there was an open season for the Zionist militias to come in and take over, which is what they did. So again, we regarded them as freedom fighters, and they went on to become successive prime ministers of Israel. Right? They were the leaders. They were the heroes. So there has to be some context. We have to understand that there are many sides to the story, and there are other narratives to the story. But I mean, and this is another point that Elon made. You don't need to just understand the historical context. You have to understand Zionism. Mm-hmm. So I was brought up to believe in Zionism as a liberation movement. Okay. It's a racist ideology. It's a white European, racist colonial ideology. And the state of Israel is based on it. So Elon couldn't remain in Israel because he was challenging the very fundamentals upon which the state was formed. So, I mean, I'm jumping ahead here. And people say, what's the answer? We have to start to see Zionism the way we saw apartheid, mm-hmm. the way we saw Jim Crow. Now, maybe if Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. were out there espousing violence and causing massacres, maybe we wouldn't be idolizing them today and naming every street in the country after MLK, right? They managed not to do that. I'm not a historian. I can't explain why that is. But what happens when there is violence? What happens when there is resistance in Watts or in Ferguson? Right? Then you bring in the militarized police, trained by Israelis, by the way, and it's a different story. Then they're basically regarded as terrorists. Then we build Cop City in Atlanta. It's the same story. It's an old story. But for some reason, Israel, Zionism, the Jewish people get a pass to do all this stuff that if any other people did it. Now, in fact, less than 50% of the Jews in Israel now are of European origin. Most of the Jews are black or brown in Israel now because they were forced out of their homelands and imported into Israel because Hitler killed all the white Jews and we thought we were going to populate Israel. But they're second-class citizens. They are an underclass. You know, when I first went to visit my aunt in Israel when I was a kid in 17, growing up in Philadelphia, and I was schooled in civil rights because my dad was part of the civil rights movement himself. A lot of Jews were. And so I knew racism when I heard it. And my aunt said, who's immigrated from here, so she's white, Jewish. She said, oh, come on in, but the Yemenite's coming to clean the house today. The Yemenite is coming to clean the house today. When I grew up, it was the Schwarze's coming to clean the house today. You know what the word Schwarze means. It's Yiddish for the N-word, basically. And I said, aha, something's going on here that they didn't tell me about. So I don't know. It depends. To answer your question, Ron, what I say to that depends on who I'm talking to. But I usually start, given who I'm talking to, where I think they're starting from, with some kind of recontextualization, some sort of education about what's going on. So if it's a Christian, by the way, happens to be a Christian or a pastor or somebody who grew up in the church, I may have to say, you know, I know it says in the Bible that God promised this land to the Jews, right? But God, and if you read the book of Joshua, by the way, that same God in that narrative said, wipe out anybody who's in your way as you come back from wandering in the desert. I know it says that in the Bible, but we have to read the Bible with our eyes today. And I know a renegade Irish priest, he's dead now, Michael Pryor, who did his time in Bethlehem. You heard Michael Pryor?
No.
Okay, you need to read Michael Pryor. He's like renegade Irish priest, and we love them, of course, right? He said, my God is not the God of ethnic cleansing. I've got to read the Bible with new eyes. And African-American church people who we bring over to Palestine all the time were raised in Exodus theology, so there's a strong identification with the Jewish people. You know, crossing over Jordan, into the Promised Land, liberation from slavery, right? And the Jewish people and all this stuff takes them about 20 seconds when they land in Israel, see what's going on, to figure out that, oh, who we thought was Pharaoh and who we thought was Israel, it's upside down. So people need to be re-educated, and you know, and those black church people had to do some hard thinking about their Bible and their theology, and it's hard. It's hard. People want to believe in God's will, but the Bible is also a historical document. And frankly, it was put together, it may be the inspired word of God, but it was also the inspired word of God that was redacted and put together by Judean kings in the 8th century who wanted to take the whole land and wanted to say, by the way, this comes from God. Right?
Their interpretation, yeah.
So we have to see that. So people who believe that the Bible is the unchangeable, inerrant word of God, I don't talk to them. Right? Or people who believe that the book of Revelation is not a metaphor for grassroots organizing against Rome, and that's the beast, but who believe that there really is going to be a lake of fire and a rapture and all that. And by the way, it doesn't end up well for the Jews, but never mind. I don't talk, and when the last non-Jew leaves Jerusalem, Jesus is coming back tomorrow. I don't talk to them either. But the wide mainstream, of church Christians in this country who are liberals and usually fairly progressive and have open minds, you can talk to them about it and say, I know you feel guilty about what the Christians did to the Jewish people for 2,000 years, but this ain't the way to go with that. Mm-hmm. And if you really love the Jewish people, you can look at him or her and say, you know, brother, you're sinning and I don't want you to sin anymore. Don't do this anymore. I know as a Christian, and I read my Matthew 25, that I'm supposed to take care of the poor, the hungry, and the marginalized and the oppressed, whether they're in my backyard or in Asia or in Africa or the Middle East or Latin America or in my city. If it's not somebody who's not interested in Christianity or the Bible, I tell them the story that Elon just told me about the fact that I said, how would you feel if your grandparents were kicked off their land in Kentucky or Massachusetts or Washington or Texas, and you've been put in a ghetto somewhere and half starved?
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying that to make it contextual for us here in the U.S. because clearly there's a division around this in the U.S. around the sides that are happening right now in the Middle East. What does your organization do to help people come to that middle ground of understanding both sides? Because that's what we're lacking here. Yeah. And how do we help people that, you know, when we have these conversations, understand both sides?
I mean, for one thing, you got to open up the conversation. Mm-hmm. If somebody accuses you of being anti-Semitic, because that charge has been weaponized.
Right, mm-hmm. Exactly.
You just got to be clear in your own mind that it's not true. You got to clear it up. You can tell them you heard it from a Jew, right? That this is not anti-Semitism.
Right.
And that the policy, the official diplomatic policy of the State of Israel for this country and everywhere else has been make sure that people do not completely confuse and conflate Judaism and Zionism and the Jewish people and the State of Israel. One and the same. I heard it from someone who was talking to the ambassador who was going out, the outgoing ambassador from the State of Israel in the United States. My mission's accomplished. What was your mission? That was his mission. So my identity is supposed to be absolutely intertwined with the State of Israel and its success as a Jewish haven. God, it's the last place I'd go now to feel safe as a Jew. And my identity is as a Zionist. That's what I'm supposed to be. So it just ain't so. There is anti-Semitism. It's getting worse, and I blame Israel for that to some extent. All this defense of the Jewish people, there's a flip side of that. I know that. You know, I love you, I love you, I love the Jewish people, I love the Jewish people. You know, there's a flip side of that, which is, you are different, I don't trust you, I wish you would go away and you were not in my face. You know what that's like.
Right.
I'm not a racist. When you hear that, what do you think, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So, over here, we've got anti-Semitism. And it's real, like any other kind of racism, and it's always been here, and it's just beneath the surface. And can I say the S word on this show? Okay? When I hear stuff like this going on now, especially in the aftermath of the Trump era, although I don't know if we're in the aftermath, it scares the shit out of me. I do not feel safe as a Jew. There is anti-Semitism. That's over here. I'm not denying that. Far from it. It's in my genes. Over here is one of the worst, in some ways, most long-standing human rights violation in modern history. Not because the people have suffered more than the Palestinians, right? But not with the entire rest of the world feeding money,
right,
and just justifying it, right? That's over here, and that needs to be taken on. But that's over here, and this is over here. You put them both together, and they're neutralized. So if somebody accuses you of anti-Semitism, when you open up that conversation, just say, this is not anti-Semitism. I abhor anti-Semitism. I'm fighting for this one particular oppressed peoples who happen to be at the mercy of something that calls itself the Jewish state. And that's too bad, and that's a tragedy. But it's not on me that they are doing that. They are doing that. So that's the first thing. The second answer to your question, Regina, is that in 2009, the Palestinian Christians, by the way, did you know that there are Palestinian Christians? They're not all Muslim, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and they're a minority. They used to be about 20%. A lot of them have left since then. Now they're less than 2% of the population. But they are a strong, proud, vocal 2%. And they're in some ways in the forefront of certain kinds of resistance, and they're speaking to the churches. So in 2009, they came out with a document that is modeled after the document that the churches in South Africa wrote in 1985, called The Challenge to the Church, where they basically said, as Christians, we cannot tolerate this basic, fundamental threat to our faith, which is about the equality of all humankind. Apartheid is heresy. We want to bring the government down. They said that. They said that. It was that, along with the letter from Birmingham jail, is one of the towering documents, public theology documents of the 20th century. And they call it public theology. They call it theology. It's an organizing document saying we have to organize to stop this evil, okay? So in 2009, they came out with a very important document. This is the American church response to it, which is also going to be available. And basically, it lays out the facts, and then it's a confessional document. It says, we can't tolerate this, and we call on the peoples of the world to see who we are and come to our aid. So my organization, Kairos USA, is a response to this 2009 document saying to our Palestinian sisters and brothers, we are with you. We confess our complicity and our responsibility as Americans. And by the way, this is a document from Britain and the Philippines and from Germany, just like this. From our context, we say, yes, we've been wrong. And we acknowledge what you need. We want to educate ourselves about it. And we want to organize the churches of the world. And, the churches have done it before. They failed in 1933 when they came out with the Braverman Declaration, where there was a renegade confessing church that said, we cannot be part of Nazism. They succeeded, to the extent they succeeded, with the Civil Rights Movement, which was born in the black churches, and then spread to the churches of the country, and then beyond the churches. But the Civil Rights Movement began in the basement of a church in Montgomery, Alabama. And the organizing strategy was taken from the Gospels, right? Because that's what Jesus was up to. He was up against the Roman Empire with 12 guys. And that spread, And so that's a success. That shows what the power of the church can have. And the anti-apartheid movement gained enormous power and enormous steam in the mid-'80s when the entire World Alliance of Reformed Churches, which is millions and millions and millions of Christians in 300 different church denominations around the world, North and South, came out and said, apartheid is a heresy. And the money started to pour in to South Africa and it helped keep it nonviolent. And the Thatcher governments and the Reagan governments finally caved and joined the boycott and the sanctions. And apartheid was on its way out. So I believe that the churches are there, they are organized. It's partly what there was a Reformed church here in Western Michigan who brought me here for this speaking tour. And I was at one of their seminaries yesterday. So if you're churched, I don't know how many of your readers go to church, your listeners go to church. If you're churched, you talk to your pastor, or to your priest, or to your bishop. Probably not a lot of bishops here in Western Michigan. Anyway.
There are a couple.
There are a couple. Okay.
There are.
And you say, as a Christian, this is wrong. I know I have to stand up for the oppressed. And I do that out of compassion for my Jewish brothers and sisters as well, who are just as much a prisoner of this evil system as the people that they're stepping on.
I mean, I think what you're addressing is that there are universal moral standards, and those should be applied in a universal fashion.
That's right.
And that's not been happening.
No.
Certainly, I think those of us who are concerned about violence or who would prefer to be nonviolent in any type of resistance we undertake see and condemn violence against civilians committed by whatever side. Mm-hmm. Violence against children should be universally condemned, no matter who they are or what side is perpetrating it. But we don't see the fair application of a universal set of moral standards in this conflict, it seems to me.
No, there are voices. I mean, there's a bill pending for Congress from Betty McCollum, who's in the House of Representatives, I forget what state she's from, that is about illegal, unlawful detention of Palestinian children. What Israel's doing to Palestinian kids, I won't go into it. It's horrible. They come in the middle of the night, terrorize them, take them, and keep them in administrative detention, which means no charges, no due process, and then they finally send them home completely messed up. And her idea is, and she's got a handful of signatures from Congress, is that people will respond to something that says children are being hurt. So there are voices, and then there's the squad. But you know, we have such power in this country. All we have to do is put one or two conditions on the billions of dollars that we send there every year. And now there's more coming. And watch the politics of Israel change. And watch that government come down. And watch people vote differently in Israel against the strong men that they've been. But we don't do it. And Biden's the worst of them. But there's no blue sky between Biden and Barack Obama as far as, Democrat or Republican, as far as Israel is concerned. Ever since Harry Truman, it's like this, Israel and the United States. There are two reasons for that, I think. One is that the billions of dollars that we send to Israel, 90% of that comes back to our defense contractors. So it's follow the money, okay? It's all coming back here. And the defense contractors make sure that they have factories and plants in every single congressional district in the country, so they make sure they've got the votes, right? The other is that, white people coming to take the land of brown people and setting up their own country, it's kind of in our DNA, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's kind of in our DNA. We understand it. We feel comfortable with Israel, the, quote, only democracy in the Middle East. So if the people don't speak, and we don't hammer on the doors of our elected representatives, then that's on us.
So the U.S. role is critical in this situation. And I'm wondering about what the rest of the international community can do. The United Nations, for example, the Security Council is worthless because
we get to veto everything.
We get to veto everything. But we're seeing movement at the General Assembly and in other international organizations.
UNICEF came out with a strong statement yesterday.
And
the guy who's now just resigned as the head of the UN, I forget what his name is. Anyway, he got kicked out because he
Human
was
Rights
outraged.
Commission.
Yeah,
I believe it
the
was.
Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
He resigned. He wrote a very strong letter. The thing about the UN is that, there's a lot to be said about the UN, but their role in this from the beginning has been to treat the Palestinians as a humanitarian problem. It have not taken a political or a moral or human rights stance about it. So, there were hundreds of thousands, now numbering millions and millions, of refugees created in 1947 and then again in 1967, who are living outside the boundaries of what is now Israel, in Lebanon and in Jordan and there used to be some in Syria. And UN sends them money so they can eat. UN hasn't been able to do anything about getting them home again. and about restoring, according to the Geneva Convention, restoring them and repatriating them to what was taken away from them in war. Nothing like that. So I think in some sense the UN and the international community it is now constituted is part of the problem. And the International Court of Justice and the adjudication of international law, there doesn't seem to be any teeth in it. So the international community hasn't been doing anything. So I don't know the answer. In some sense, I've been waiting for Israel to cave in on itself for a long time because it's an unsustainable project. Now, Israeli society is coming apart. The other issue is talking about the two-state solution, which was a snare and a delusion from the beginning. Israel and the United States never had the intention of there being a Palestinian state. But when you read your letter to they lied about it. Israel was always going to take it all, and we were always going to help them.
So do you think that a two-state solution would be the answer, or do you think it should be one state with what happened in South Africa, a non-racial society?
Short answer is yes. The longer answer is that at one point, dividing the baby and making a two-state solution is never a great solution. It never works that well. I mean, take a look at the history of Ireland and other places. But that's over, because all through the so-called peace process to negotiate a two-state solution, Israel's been busy making that impossible, and it isn't possible. So it's like the metaphor is that we got a pizza and we're going to divide up the pizza, right? So it's in the middle of the table, and while we're talking, I'm eating the pizza. Well, there's no more pizza left. I've eaten the whole pizza. There's no more possibility politically for there to be a two-state solution. What it would look like now, and what people still say is on the table, look a lot like what the South African government was proposing right before the end of apartheid,
Bantustan.
which is Bantustans. So you've got these little pockets, little ghettos, you can't grow, run by your own people, not their people, completely surrounded and isolated. If you take a look at the two maps of the Bantustans and the homelands and what the West Bank and Gaza looks like today, it's remarkably similar. So the two-state solution said, I never liked it because it was a way to legitimize the whole Zionist enterprise. There's a lot that the Palestinians were not going to get, even in the best of circumstances. That still means that they don't get to go home. That they're being, and now we're talking about getting all of Gaza into camps in Egypt. Have you read about this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Displacement.
So now they're talking about relocation. There's another word for that. It's called population transfer. That's illegal. You do not transfer populations. It is, by international law, it's illegal. That's what they're talking about. That's always been the end game. How do you get rid of these people so we can have it all? If we can't kill them, we'll move them out. Or we'll make it impossible for them to live, so they'll move out. So yes, I see one state. People say, oh, they'll never be able to live together. They've been hating each other for 2,000 years. That's a lie. In my grandfather's time, and even in the time between 67 and the First Intifada, when the settlements started to grow and Palestinians saw that this is not an occupation but a colonial takeover, there was a free movement between what was 1948 Israel and the West Bank. Both sides loved it. Israelis were going to see where they could never go before, and they were having vacations. Palestinians were working not as laborers, but in skilled professions in Tel Aviv. You know, settlers were getting their cars serviced by Palestinians in the West Bank. Our two peoples are very similar. And we get along just fine. I'm here to tell you, by personal experience. And I'm fond of saying, you know, if the Jews and the Palestinians could get together and build a society together, we would build a country that would be the wonder of the world. It would be a beautiful thing. It could happen if we could just get the politicians out of the way.
That's what I was going to say. With the current leadership, do you think this could happen?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that is so discouraging is the mainstream press and how they picture the whole thing. And that's what people see. That's their consciousness is shaped by that. You're telling a whole different story. which it makes absolute sense to me, but people don't hear that. People don't know that story, and that's a tragedy.
Well, you got to watch Al Jazeera and not Fox News, or CNN, for that matter.
Or Democracy Now.
And watch Democracy Now. Yeah. I mean, because, Gaza's, as I say, Gaza's a big story now, but they're not telling the story.
Right.
They're showing the disaster of pornography, but they're not showing this. They're not telling the story.
No.
I've got a tough job here in Western Michigan over these next 2 days because people are signing up like crazy to come to these lectures. My hosts are saying, "Oh my God, we had to close it off at 150 people." Why? They want answers, and they're saying, "Oh, he's going to bring hope. He's going to tell us what to do." I'm going to say, let's just start with acknowledging what's true and what the facts are, and then let's take it from there, because this is so much bigger than Palestine. This is just one little corner of the neoliberal, neo-colonial world that's bringing the whole planet down around our ears. We've got to get past the denial. We've got to get past the stuff we think we want to believe about what's going on. We've got to come to our senses. And I can't make that happen. I'm just one more voice, so let's have more voices. And I'm just trying to create more voices, I guess.
I was impressed with Jewish Voices for Peace at Grand Central last week.
That was amazing.
That was
wasn't it?
wonderful to see that. And I think it was very brave. I think it's brave what you do, and I think it was very brave what Jewish Voices for Peace did there. And I thought it sent a real strong message that, hey, we're for justice. Not every Jew is for Zionism. We're for justice. Yeah, and I thought that was very powerful.
So where's everybody else?
Well, so that's one of my questions. I mean, I know a number of Jewish people in our community who are very liberal on almost every other issue that I can think of, but on this issue, they're intransigent, and they don't seem to recognize that historical context that you've sketched out. They want to. There's great fear, and there is a tendency to cast the whole situation in terms of World War II and the Holocaust, and that this is there's no difference between what Hamas did on October 7th and what happened in the 1930s and 1940s.
Right.
So, and these are good people. These are very decent people, and yet they can't seem to, and I know many of them would be very critical of the United States government if it was violating international law, but they can't bring themselves.
Which we are.
Which we are.
We're violating our own law. We're not supposed to be sending money and arms to be used for those kinds of purposes.
Yeah.
We are absolutely in violation of the Leahy Act and the Arms Import and Control Act.
On any number of issues, the United States is violating international law.
And our foreign policy is, it's not in our own interest. That's what I tell people who are lobbying. It's like, don't talk to them about human rights. Say, this is not in the United States' interest to be supporting Israel, and here's why. Because you're going to bring the whole region down around our ears.
But my question is, these Jewish friends can't seem to bring themselves to criticize the state of Israel. They would very quickly condemn the United States government for violations of international law, but they can't separate out a right-wing state that's violating international law from the Judaism in general. And so how...
And I know, and I don't get that. What is this fixation on Israel and the Jews? That's why I say it scares me, because it's giving me as a Jew too much power, and it feeds right into the classic anti-Semitic tropes. The Jews have a conspiracy to take over the world. The Jews control the banks. The Jews control the governments, right? And it's sort of coming true. So I think it's anti-Semitism, frankly. It's the other side of anti-Semitism. And people are using us for their own purposes. The evangelical fundamentalist Christians are pouring money into Israel, and they're using Israel for their own political, and Israel's letting themselves be used for that. I mean, they don't believe in the second coming, right? But the right-wing people who are gaining control of this country, they love Israel because it speaks theologically, and it speaks politically, and it speaks racially. I don't know, I'm sort of casting around here, Ron, because I'm not sure I really understand the answer. Unilateral, bilateral support for Israel in this country has become a habit. And you'd think we would have broken that habit by now. But all we can do is give a little slap on the wrist, and even that slap on the wrist is gone. So I don't know what to make of that, and I don't know what to do about it.
I think there's a lot to be learned from South Africa. I think there's a lot to be learned from the civil rights movement. And the real answer is to build a constituency who stands for change and for justice in this whole area. I think your remarks about churches are very important. I think the churches played a huge part in the civil rights movement and in the South African movement. And I think, but there has to be an ongoing movement. It can't be, we do a demonstration and it's over. It's got to be ongoing. We have a man here in this community, Dan Smith, who's out there right now, who has been a leader in this. And he needs more support. He needs more support because we have to put this issue on the public agenda. It will drop off the public agenda after the spotlight's over this issue.
So let it begin in Western Michigan with connections to other communities in this country. And, you know, I know who they are, and the JVP people, Jewish Voice for Peace people know who they are, and the Committee for Palestinian Human Rights knows who they are, and there are lots of organizations that can continue to build that network. And we do it, and we organize as best we know how. As best we know how. And, you know, and I also looked to the black churches. You know, there was something interesting that happened in Ferguson, because it happened exactly the same time that summer when Israel was doing its last big bombing of Gaza. That would have been 2014. When was that? Ferguson, Missouri.
I think
16?
It was the same
sounds
summer.
about
It was
right.
not that long ago.
Yeah.
Okay? And there were people holding up banners, Free Gaza, right? And the tear gas canisters that were being, what was that? What was the connection? Something about the tear gas that was being used on the people in Ferguson was the same stuff that was being used on the people in Gaza.
Yeah.
And the police are being trained with methods that they learned from Israel, that's importing those methods against, quote, terrorism that's being used here. So I look for an alliance with Black Lives Matter. And I mean, there's controversy, as I believe, within the black community. Why should we be working for that over there when we've got so much work to do at home? But what I've also heard from African American friends in the movement is, no. You go over there and you connect with brothers and sisters who are being subjected to the same thing that you're being subjected to. You come back and you are energized and strengthened to take on the fight back home. So there's no home anymore. The whole world is our home. We are connected, as Martin Luther King said, with the fabric, the inescapable fabric of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, he says, right? We are all in this together. So, you know, you have Black Lives Matter people, white and black, demonstrating in Ferguson or wherever. You have people in the favelas in Brazil that set up a tent city fighting for something about how they needed support from the government because they were being starved to death right in the heart of Brazil. And I heard about this. They had a sign at the entrance of their favela, of their favela, which said, "Welcome to Palestine." We had Swedish workers demonstrating in Sweden because the government was turning right and they wanted workers' rights restored. right, who are waving Palestinian flags. So people identify very strongly with Palestine for some reason. It has enormous power to organize. And I'll tell you, the only reason, not the only reason, but a big reason, and I've heard this from Palestinians, that they are still standing and they are still fighting is because they get enormous support from us out here in the world in the movement. They are not forgotten.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I guess I wanted to go back to what do we do in terms of the immediate critical situation, the crisis that's happening right now, and should we be pushing for a ceasefire and some type of de-escalation? Is it possible that we could convince the United States government, the Biden administration, to support that? I mean, it's the rest of the world seems to be pretty much in favor of doing that, but we're not. So what do we do right now in terms of the immediate crisis, the ongoing crisis?
If we could convince the United States government to support a ceasefire, yes, that would be a good thing. That would be a good sign. The thing about a ceasefire is that in the past, that's been the SOP, right? You let both sides do whatever damage they can do. You impose a ceasefire on them. They sort of stop, maybe. And the idea is to restore the status quo. The status quo will bring us right back to where we are now.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Mark, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you with us. Thanks to Regina and Don, my regular panelists. And I think we're out of time for today. Please join us again on Critical Issues, Alternative Views.